Then what is your number then on Megalopolis?
Oh, man. Oh.
Wow.
Like, the most talked about movie of the year, possibly one of them, the most eagerly anticipated and questioned about movie of the year. It's here. It's Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis, a fable. And we've seen it.
We saw it in IMAX because there was not a critic screening. So you had to go to one of these IMAX showings last night, Monday night. They were all over Los Angeles and all over the country. So you and I were at different theaters, but both saw it. And there was a whole like pre-show thing with Coppola and Robert De Niro and Spike Lee being interviewed live on stage at the New York Film Festival, which was a bit of a cluster, and those unwieldy, these things.
Yeah, and there's nothing less useful than a pre-screening Q&A, because it's like, well, no one's seen the movie yet. You can't really talk about it. What are we talking about? Not much, as it turns out. Yeah,
but there is so much to talk about once you have seen it. So you guys subscribe, because this kind of movie here is what we do here at Breakfast All Day. So come and hang out. And if you have seen it, we'd love to hear your thoughts as well, because I think there's a lot to chew on here and a lot to interpret, whether you like it or not. You're going to want to talk about it afterward.
From visionary writer and director Francis Ford Coppola comes an event nothing can prepare you for.
Adam Driver is a very ambitious and visionary architect in a near future city called New Rome, which looks a lot like New York City. He lives in what is essentially the top of the Chrysler building. So if you've ever wondered what the inside of the Chrysler building roof looks like, it's his apartment / loft / workspace. His name is Caesar Catalina, and he has a vision for the decaying New Rome that is gleaming and a utopia. And he's got all these plans with this substance that he has won the Nobel Prize for called Megalon, which sounds like some forgotten transformer.
Godzilla fought Megalon, I will have you know. Yes. There's a whole movie called Godzilla versus Megalon that apparently no one told Francis Ford Coppola.
Yes, it's also not a megalodon. This is not the Meg. It's Megalopolis. So he has an idea for what the city could be like. Meanwhile, the mayor, played by Giancarlo Esposito, has a much more pragmatic idea of like easy money-making devices like casinos, because those work out so well for the people who own casinos all the time. And then his daughter, played by Nathalie Emmanuel, then has a dalliance with Caesar, and she's sort of torn between these two men, these two visions. But New Rome is just decadent, and it is decaying. And this movie has so many ideas, and it is such a wild swing in its ambition in terms of the visuals, in terms of just the sprawling cast. I admire what he's doing here. He's been working on this for decades. It's been in gestation for like 40 years, and he spent $120 million of his own money. He sold part of his vineyard. He sold part of his wine business to finance this because nobody would. And it's so earnest, and it's so personal, and it's so clear from watching that pre-show thing how much of his own philosophy is in this, because there's this one line in the many, many speechifying speeches that Adam Driver's character gives. There's this one line that he thinks is really crucial.
We're in need of a great debate about the future.
I'm just so mixed on this because I was dazzled by it from a production standpoint, the cinematography from Mihai Malamir Jr., who also shot The Master and shot Coppola's Youth Before Youth, the costume designs from Coppola's longtime costume designer. So like, it's gorgeous, but then it's all over the place. It's wildly varied and inconsistent in terms of its tone, in terms of the performances, in terms of the ideas. Like Aubrey Plaza and Shia LaBeouf are doing some really fun stuff here that belongs in a totally other film that is not this. So I want to talk about it with you. I want to work through it, but I can't dismiss it entirely. It's not the unmitigated disaster that I think people thought it was coming out of festivals, but it's also not the long hoped for masterpiece that it could have been.
It's not a particularly mitigated disaster, I'll say that much. I did not ever have the sense that Coppola was in control of his own storytelling.
No.
Like, you think about, I was trying to think like a perfect example, the wedding scene at the beginning of The Godfather. You are being introduced to dozens of characters, you're being brought into this world, and it is explained to you, you are brought into a context, and it never feels like it's stopping to deliver exposition. This movie, I never felt like the film had a firm grasp on what the story was and what the goals were. Like there were whole chunks where I'm like, what's at stake here? What do people want here? Apart from the grander thing of like, I want to build my utopia. It just gets so bogged down in like too much of everything. And like, I think like Shia LaBeouf and Aubrey Plaza are giving like terrible performances. I think this is the first time.
Fun though, right?
But, well, I mean, I think they were let loose, and so this is what they came up with. But like, this is the first time I felt like Aubrey Plaza wasn't in on the joke, you know, in a movie. It felt like she was just sort of thrown into this thing, and she's like going big. Jason Schwartzman is mugging like crazy as a very minor character, but like doing everything he can to make you notice that he's standing there. Shia LaBeouf, it was giving me some real Corey Feldman energy throughout, intentional or not. That was all I came away with. Yeah, this film is, I think it's very often ugly. I mean, like there's so much weird green screen going on. You know, it's like his big idea was like, we're like Rome. We're an empire in decline. And that's the gong this movie just strikes over and over and over again. It's like, yes, Francis, we get it. What else do you have to say about now? And what else do you have to say about the future? Because to build a movie whose utopia rests upon an imaginary substance that can do everything, apparently, or can do nothing. I don't even know what Megalon does. That's part of the problem with this movie. Apart from show him his memories of his dead wife, I don't get what this magical substance does. What function does it fulfill? You know,
a lot, because it also has medical purposes, and you can use it to build structures and like
dresses. Like it's all just, yeah. This movie's just zinging out in a million directions, and like, Adam Driver delivers a couple of Shakespearean monologues, just because why not? I'm
like, are you gonna do the entire to be or not to be monologue? We're gonna see the whole thing?
Oh yes, he is. Like there's just that whole, and that's part of this whole early sequence where like it's a model city and all these major characters are on these sort of like hanging scaffolding above them, and already I could tell like, oh, there's no directorial grasp on this at all, because it just felt so messy and loud and muggy and just spinning off in a million directions. And it's like, this is the kind of movie that gives Studio Notes a good name, because I think a lot of times like there are directors' passion projects that wind up being extraordinary and legendary movies, but there are as many, if not more, of them where like a director either is coming off a hit and has the chits to do exactly what he wants to do, or in this case, like sold off a winery because none of his kids wanted it because they're all filmmakers themselves. Yeah. And so we had this like nest egg to borrow against. And it's just sort of unfettered. And like, we've been down this road before with Coppola. Like, yes, you get an unhinged masterpiece like, Apocalypse Now, or you get like an unhinged snooze like One from the Heart, and this is more in that category, I think, where it's like you had a lot of ideas and you're all throwing them up there and everybody's talking over each other, and I came away exhausted. I was never exhilarated at watching a great filmmaker untethered. I just was like, oh God, somebody needed to come in and say no or shape this thing. It's bananas. Also, like, I don't know how many theaters are going to get this, but when we saw it, there's a theater employee has to come in and do a thing at one point, and the lights come up, and it's like, why is this happening? Right. It's not adding anything to this experience. It's just, it is the ultimate hat on a hat, like there wasn't enough happening in this movie. Now we're going to change aspect ratios, bring up the house lights, and have a theater employee do like a shadow play. It's like, what is going on?
Yeah, I wondered too, like, is every theater for every showing across the country and around the world going to have somebody like schlep out at the hour and 48-minute mark, whatever it is? And like, I couldn't even figure out what it was at first. Like, there's a guy who came out with what looked like a tripod, and like then the screen gets, because we saw it in IMAX, and the screen gets like super small. I guess it's meant to be like a press conference. I couldn't even grasp what the intention was with that.
I have to imagine that there's like a sort of roadshow version and theatrical version. Like I can't imagine that every single screening of this movie in a commercial theater is going to involve some poor usher having to go stand in front of the screen and do whatever the thing is. But yeah, again, I think Coppola has done some great work, but let's face it, they're not all great. And this, I think, goes in the not great category. Try though he might. Like, there's a sequence toward the end that I don't think is supposed to be funny, but everybody laughed in my theater, and it was kind of like, I couldn't even tell it's Jon Voight's last big scene. I'll just say that much.
I think it's meant to be funny. I think a lot of what Aubrey Plaza and Shia LaBeouf are doing there is meant to be funny, but it clangs with the self-seriousness and like the Shakespearean tragedy of it all. It's like two different movies at once.
Yeah, and I mean, let's face it, I'll hear about this in the comments, and I don't care. The women's roles here are ridiculous. Every woman in this movie is either here to be adoring of a powerful or to be like a duplicitous monster.
Or like a hot lesbian doing drugs and making out at the club.
Yes. Or a hot chick, or Chloe Feynman, like being a club kid or whatever. It's.
But then the Nathalie Emmanuel character is meant to be sort of magical in that she like inspires these great men to be the best versions of themselves, which happen to also clash with each other. Yeah. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm saying that's what Coppola's intention is with her.
But she ultimately winds up being a trophy for them to fight over. Daddy versus husband or whatever. So. Yeah, I don't want to come in and poop on this movie, but it was a miserable experience for the most part.
I wasn't miserable and I wasn't bored. I was sort of riveted, like, oh, what weird thing is going to happen next? Like, where else can he go with this that just defies all my expectations? Like, in a world where we see so many reboots and IP legacy sequels and all that. Like, I welcome the extremist maximalist weirdness of Coppola. Like, it's not always good, but it's always interesting, I think, as far as, oh, this is really strange. Where's it going next? And I don't think it's ugly. There's some stuff with the split screens that's kind of pretty. Like, there's an intentional heightened artificiality to like the skies and the backgrounds that is often quite cool. There's a thing that happens where I think Caesar is driving through New Rome and like entire statues are crumbling and falling. It's a very on the nose metaphor, but it's cool looking. Like, that's why I'm so torn on this, because there's so much that's like beating you over the head with its themes, but then there's enough that's inspired that I'm like, you still got me. I don't know.
Well, there's like these big sequences that you wish came off better. Like, there's this whole crazy like the literal bread and circuses moment where there's like a chariot race and like tumbling clowns, and then suddenly you have QAnon people bursting in or something, or like the scaffolding thing where you're like, okay, well, this is big and elaborate, but it doesn't, there's not like a tight hand with sort of telling you things or indicating what's important or what's even happening half the time. And then you have like these outside scenes in the city, in the streets, where there's supposed to be like a big mob, and it seems like there's not enough people. Like it's mob scene day, but only 20 extras showed up. This to me just kind of felt like Coppola being like, I can do whatever I want, and I'm going to do all the things that I want at the same time.
Yeah. And Adam Driver, given that he's like the central creative figure here, I think is wildly undefined.
Yeah.
Like,
he's enigmatic.
Is he serious? Is he focused, visionary? Sometimes he's like doing crazy drugs and he's really flippant and glib. So I didn't get who he was. And maybe it's just like, oh, he's mourning and that's why he's erratic. But even that's not a great explanation. So that from the very beginning is a problem. But Catherine Hunter's here.
Yay. Yes.
That's
true.
great. But then like Lawrence Fishburne's here, but then they make him explain everything. And like he literally, I'm not exaggerating, literally spells out what we are reading on screen. He reads the title cards to us.
And there are a bunch of title cards.
So many, all like, So, all right, then what is your number then on Megalopolis?
Oh, man. Oh.
Wow.
Like a 4.8. I mean, I really think it is. If there were at least, if I could have come away with like, oh, but at least the part where happens is so amazing.
Yeah.
There was just like never a moment in this movie that felt like it was accomplishing what it set out to do. It just was. It's a lot. It's all spaghetti and no wall. I don't know how else to describe it.
Well, I'm actually, after all that, not that far away from you. I would say like a 5.2, 5.3, because I think it's like you should see it because a Coppola movie is an event.
You'll talk about it. You'll have a lot to talk about,
right.
Even if it's just staring at each other going, what the F was that? It's something. And you're right. So much of cinema is mass produced that like attention must be paid to something that is this singularly gonzo. But the fact that it is singularly gonzo doesn't also mean that it works or that it's good.
Yeah. All right. Well, go see it, please, and let us know what you think. We can't wait to hear your thoughts.